I'm going to talk about LA StewMap, which is a project to map stewardship activities in Los Angeles. And this has been an ongoing project since I moved out here as a postdoc in 2014. So many of you may have seen me or heard of it, so hopefully this will be a nice update to anyone who has been wondering, I'm sure not staying up at night, but thinking, what happened to StewMap? This is a little update here. I'm from the Loyola Marymount University Center for Urban Resilience. StewMap is now funded through a partnership with the Pacific Southwest Forest Service Research Center, which funds my graduate student, Crystal Bally, who's here today, to do some of this work. So what is StewMap? So the Los Angeles StewMap is the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project, which is our research project, but part of a national Forest Service effort, actually now international, to find, survey, and map all of the groups and organizations working on urban environmental stewardship. The research is really to help us better understand the activities, partnerships, and geographical footprint of stewardship, and in this case, looking at Los Angeles County. Like I said, it's a national Forest Service research effort with projects in Baltimore, New York City, started in New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Juan, and Seattle. Also coming online, I just found out in our last call, is Denver, Paris, Hawaii, Austin. It's kind of becoming a really big effort, which is really exciting because we can then look nationally and internationally at stewardship. My dissertation was in Baltimore and Seattle, so I've kind of been married to StewMap for about a decade. So how do we define environmental stewardship, right? Because can be a pretty nebulous term. For this research, we define it pretty broadly. So an environmental stewardship organization is one who does one of these activities: conserves, manages, monitors, advocates for, or educates the public about their local environments. So this is really stewardship being a connection with the local environment. So why are we studying these groups? And we've touched on this a bunch today, right? In Jonathan's presentation, he talked about how public agencies have a role, but we need the involvement of other organizations to really carry out the projects, to conduct the activities that can help us meet urban sustainability policies and goals. And stewardship as a term, as a concept, can be an organizing concept for groups from all sectors working on or for the environment, be conducted by organizations with varying missions, have direct effects on on our sustainability goals and outcomes, and then have both social and ecological benefits, which goes to sort of the theme of today. And really, the intent is that understanding the full scope of stewardship activities occurring in a city or region can provide information that can facilitate our ongoing efforts. And I'll talk about how we're thinking about taking the research to application. So like I said, it's been going on for a while here in Los Angeles. I moved out here in 2013 after I finished my PhD and started this project. So the timeline is just to show where we are. We're sort of at the culmination of the project at this point. We go out and do this sort of inventory of organizations where there's informational meetings with key informants. I've probably met with some of you folks to ask, who do you work with? Do you have a directory of organizations? We compile all of those and then conduct what we call snowball sampling, which is to look at those, the full list that we have, continue to ask organizations if they have directories until we reach what we think is saturation. So it's as comprehensive a snapshot of stewardship as the organizations as we can get at the time. Then I sent out a survey, which some of you completed, thank you very much, that asks about characteristics of your organization, who you work with, where you work, and I'll show you some of those results today. Data analyses have been going on, and now we're in this dissemination of results through publications, through talks like these, and then also some collaborative development of products that I'll talk about too. So right into the results. We have just sort of the who, how, and where of, or who, where, and how of environmental stewardship. So the who, our initial inventory found 715 community groups, nonprofits, city agencies, and businesses. Businesses, if they had performed some civic activity, they're included. This is mostly civic stewardship. We had a 20% response rate, which is pretty good for a social survey. I think New York City had 18, so we're beating them. And then when I looked at all of the network responses, so who do you work with, we found, after cleaning up, an additional 430 groups that were identified by our respondents. So we have now a snapshot of when I collected this data, 1,145 organizations working on stewardship in Los Angeles. And then we look at sector. So we ask, what is the legal designation of your organization? Here, mindful that we're looking at LA County, so we asked questions of a lot of city agencies, right? So there are 88, I believe, cities in Los Angeles County. So the nonprofit sector was 57%. Public sector, including agencies from local to federal, was 35%. And then a little bit of private, 5%. Other, generally partnerships, coalitions, people didn't quite know how to call themselves. And the reason I noted the public agency percentage is that it's actually larger here than I've seen in other cities. And I do think it's because we looked at the region and really included a lot of different agencies, which is important in Los Angeles, given the geography. So a few of the survey responses, we asked, what do you work on? So that idea of varying missions, right? And they could choose all that apply. So these are not discrete answers, but environment, of course, makes sense, was 75% of groups said that they work on the environment. Community improvement, capacity building was about 50%, education, youth. Arts and culture, though, was the fifth most chosen response. So we can see that groups are really thinking about environmental stewardship through different lenses. So then the where. So Crystal has been working away to draw the polygons, but first we ask, where do you work? What type of site do you work on? And these are standard questions across cities. So we have like a water-related pot, I guess, a land-related area, and building-related. In LA, we really see the water-related was kind of the watershed-related. So a lot of folks looking at LA River and the watershed was the most chosen, but then really land-related was the biggest area we saw. So parks, if this is too small to read, parks, trails, bike paths, sort of greenways, public right-of-way, so street trees. And then the actual geospatial analyses. So we mapped the addresses for all 715 of those original inventoried organizations. And then we also mapped the addresses of those identified 430 collaborating organizations as a separate layer. And then those who responded provided where do you work in very broad detail. So big in breadth and sometimes really small in tiny little turfs. And this is Crystal's work. Crystal is looking at the spatial relationship between environmental stewardship and demographics in LA County. So the background of this first map is going to be demographic. This is the address map, so the point layer we call it. This is all of the addresses. The pink are the environmental stewardship organizations, or ESOs, as we've shortened it to, that responded to the survey. The green are those that we identified but did not respond, but we researched address information for all of the organizations. And then on the other side are the collaborators and those who responded. We asked 3 separate network questions. We asked, who do you collaborate with, who do you provide information to, and who do you receive funding from? And so those would be represented there. And then, like I said, 115 groups, so then a bit fewer than actually responded to the survey, but they provided graciously, because it's it's a pretty detailed question, text responses to describe where they work. And we call those stewardship turfs, and they were translated into geospatial polygons using ArcGIS. Also wanted to point out that this picture on the left is from Jamie's work. So Dr. John Dorsey is a close collaborator of our center. So one of the site types is a rain garden. And so this is an initial cut at the stewardship turfs across LA County. This is only 91. This is the these are the small turfs, not the region-wide or city-wide turfs, so that you can actually see where the smaller ones are laid out, and they're not all into one big county-wide layer. But you can see kind of the distribution of the smaller turfs. Some of them are really small, so if you see tiny little dots on there, that's like a community garden. So a lot of this will be really better visualized when we can drill down and do an interactive online tool. And then these two are the organizations that then reported working citywide and countywide, some multi-county and regionally. And then my specific focus, my area of expertise is governance and network analysis. So I really kind of get excited and dive into these collaborative questions. So we ask networking questions about, like I said, which groups collaborate with, receive information from, and receive funding from other organizations for stewardship activities. Just in the collaborative question, the respondents reported over 1,300 regular collaborators. Those are not unique, so they could have, multiple organizations could report the same group, but still over 1,300 partnerships, supporting the idea that we're really embedded in these dense networks. And then I did some initial network analyses in UCINet for the collaborative and information networks. I also have recently gone to a training on some further analyses, which I'll talk about a little bit. So this is just the dot map of 675 organizations that we have collaboration information for. The size is related to the number of in-degree ties, so the number of times that dot was named by somebody else as a collaborator. And the reason we do in-degree is because if we do out-degree, then the person who named 100 organizations would be the biggest node, and it would kind of be a misrepresentation. These are the information sharing relationships among all of those groups. So the arrowhead is pointing to the group that the other group reported receiving information from, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but that's the way we ask the question, so the arrows look a little bit confusing. But so you can see the larger organizations are the ones that we consider having a lot of activity in the network, the larger nodes. And then this is the collaborative network, which is more ties. So then we add them all together, and this is the web of stewardship in Los Angeles County. Now, this 1,275 ties just with collaborative and information sharing. So then I start to do some more deep dive into the data, which I'm looking forward to doing more of as we move forward with the analyses. But these pink nodes now are those who have 3 or greater in ties. And all of the blue nodes are those that have fewer than 3. So you can see that there are a few known, 52 out of 675 are really active. The pink here are those who have 0 collaborative ties. So remember, I looked at both information and collaboration. So this is the full network. The pink ones are those that didn't report or were not reported as collaborators, either or. Then looking back at this full network, this is a different way of analyzing it. So this is the in-degree ties, so how many were reported. The size of the node in this figure is based on a different measure. It's called betweenness. It's how many times an organization lies between 2 organizations so that each organization reported them as a partner. So if that organization was removed, those two would be disconnected. And in the environmental governance literature, this is considered influence. So those betweenness, those between nodes are considered bridges. So it's like the network would be a little bit broken, a little more broken if those groups disappeared or if those relationships were lost. So you can see there's a much more even distribution of just regular activity of those who have relationships. But once you look more deeply at this idea of influence, there's only a few. And I colored them in pink of those who have just one or greater rated. So all of the rest of the blue ones are 0. So they've never have that in-between relationship. They're never really a bridge, which is interesting to think about the influencers in a network. So if you're thinking about getting a project completed, getting support for a policy, those types of things, you have these hub organizations that really are holding a lot of the influential power, I would say, in the network. So that's a whole lot to look at, but there's a whole other, there's a lot of other things you can do then. These are just sort of initial cuts at looking at the broad, full network. These initial analyses show this very large collaborative information sharing stewardship network in LA. But really, most activity and influence lies with a few organizations. And further analyses I'm planning to continue over this summer, looking at things like looking at the network by site type. So are there certain clusters around street trees? Are there certain clusters around rain gardens, things like that? And the idea really of StewMap always as a Forest Service research project is both research and application. So today I've presented the data, and now we're thinking about, okay, how do these data get used, right? So how can we actually get this, how can this be the most useful to folks who are the practitioners? And nationally, researchers have worked with practitioners in each city to build tools locally appropriate. They've included searchable databases, custom maps and reports, online visualizations, and I'm on these quarterly multi-city calls with the StewMap research team that we've been developing a multi-city research platform that visualizes both the TERFs and the network relationships, which I want to show you because I'm very excited about it. So we're going to look in New York, boo, but we can get it for LA. They did start it, and they are really the engine. Okay, so this is in development. It's from on somebody's server somewhere. So the multi-city platform right now provides a mechanism to look at the addresses, so I showed that point layer, as well as these green lines are the network connections, which is the most exciting thing to me because we've been trying for years to figure out how to visualize the network connections spatially. And on the left side are ways to filter the data. So thinking about all of the different questions that were on the survey, you can then filter each group, or you can filter down to what you want to see. So that primary focus question, the organizational mission, stewardship focus, which was that site type bar graph I showed you, and then sector organization type. And there are actually a lot more questions on the survey, but I don't want to bog everyone down with data, even though it's exciting to me. So this is showing for New York City that TERF map. So this is, if I had showed you just one slide of TERFs, which is why we, Crystal separated them out for us, you'd just see one big blob, right? Because you see region, you see citywide, and it's just one big blob. But and then you can overlay all of the points and all of the relationships. But if you drill down and select smaller TERFs, you can start to see these smaller sites. So I did just a screenshot of smaller TERF and community garden. So that's showing you all of the groups that said they work on community gardens. These aren't necessarily community gardens, but it's all of the groups that reported where they work and that they also work on community gardens. And then you can drill down further and actually see, zoom in. This is just like any Google map view. You can zoom in and actually look at the TERFs and the neighborhood. You click on one, and what pops up is all of the responses to the survey if they opted in to make it public. So you get their address information. You see there's the 3 network connections, so 3 organizations that they reported working with. And then you can scroll down and see pretty much everything that they've reported on the survey. These are also able to be popped out into Excel tables, so you could download information on and reports on the organizations that you've chosen. So this is in development. From what I understand, it will be available to every city that is in the StewMap research program. So I'm hoping to upload LA layers and as soon as they launch it. So basically, in conclusion, StewMap is it's a list of all the groups and organizations conducting stewardship within a given city or region at the time, of course, that the survey was conducted. A snapshot in time of the stewardship activities and the organizational networks. A depiction of the partnership, funding, and information relationships between stewardship organizations, and then a map or series of maps showing where organizations conduct stewardship and where those turfs overlap. I also, not just where they overlap, but where they aren't, right? So where is stewardship not happening is something we really want to look at. Crystal wants to look at the density of stewardship as it compares to some demographics across LA. So we'll be doing some spatial regression analysis there. And again, it's a multi-city research study, so we can really compare stewardship activities and networks across the country, and soon across some other countries. But it can be this public interactive database. So we're developing this multi-city platform. There's also possibilities to think about other types of features there where you could actually sign in and add yourself. So instead of just having this static research project, it's this interactive, updatable platform. An online map, like I showed you. A mapping tool that utilizes stewardship turfs as one layer of information, so thinking about turfs overlaid with other spatial data that we've seen today or that we work with in our own research or practice. And then it's really a long-term research foundation to think about relationships between stewardship and social and environmental outcomes. The question marks are kind of, what else can it be? Well, it can be a lot of different things based on what is useful to folks who will use it. So that is to say that you are invited to join us in developing the next phase of LA StewMap. We're holding 2 workshops this summer for LA Urban Center partners and for folks who responded to StewMap and were on that initial list. We're going to show a range of examples of what StewMap can be. It's been developed in different ways in different cities, so I don't have the time, obviously, here to talk about all of it. And really, we want to turn this over to people who will use it. So participation is extremely valuable. This is an important piece of the process for us, because I know what I know from the literature and from my PhD work, but to you guys, that's probably what I think is interesting is not going to be what you find useful necessarily. So we'll be sending out probably this week an invitation through the LA Urban Center. So please consider RSVPing and joining us. There's one at downtown at El Pueblo, the LA Urban Center building, and one at LMU to try to accommodate different geographic locations. And that is it for me.